Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today, actually, I have the great pleasure of welcoming with us Roy van Griensven. Roy is the head of business transformation at Mitsubishi Chemical Group. Roy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on this, Gonzalo.
Roy, would you mind introducing yourself briefly and your company?
Absolutely. So, as you pronounced, let's say my name is Roy van Griensven. I joined Mitsubishi Chemical Group almost 4 years ago now, after a long history in companies like Philips and AkzoNobel. So the chemical industry, very new industry from my perspective, but extremely exciting. A lot of change, a lot of transformation going on. Where the chemical industry is reinventing itself. I initially joined the company in the advanced materials group, while we were still a bit of a holding structure with over 300 kind of separated operating companies. But since roughly a year and a half, 2 years, we are rapidly transforming ourselves to one global chemical company, actually with the ambition to be the #1 chemical company in the world. And that transformation, I think, is well underway. Still a lot of work to be done, but extremely exciting.
Sounds like a truly exciting journey, and I know your aspirations when it comes to transformation are pretty bold. So we're gonna get into that briefly. Roy, Mitsubishi started the journey on decision intelligence back in the day, partnering with Aera. By now, a couple of years ago, like a true pioneer, right? In many ways. How would you say decision-making environment that Mitsubishi has, that environment on decision-making has evolved within your company, and where does decision intelligence fit today in the context of these strategic goals?
Yeah. Now, I think while there is still quite a long way to go, I would say, to make decision intelligence the per de facto kind of default standard of how we drive kind of the organization of how we make decisions in the company. I think it fits extremely well in the philosophy and the ambition of transformation. And I'll explain why. Because if you look at how we've run the company, and how we've run a company with, like I said, over 300 separate entities before, there is a very clear need for change. So the sense of urgency in terms of how we collaborate as a global company across all the different regions with 70,000 people involved requires a very different way of working. Where in the past people were used to, okay, if you collaborate with 10, 20, 40 people, you can have a dialogue, you can say, hey, what do you think, what do I think, and let's make a decision. With 70,000 people, with a global supply chain, with regions, with market-facing teams across boundaries, with customers that actually are not limited to country boundaries, that's simply impossible. Now, having said that, I think a lot of people still do not fully understand the true meaning of decision intelligence. But what we see when you're able to show it, even if it's in individual use cases, then people start to think, okay, I can imagine how in future making decisions is going to work. Operationalizing still takes a lot of time, right, and effort, but I think it brings that aha moment of, okay, that's the North Star that we're moving towards as a company. And that helps us in painting that picture for transformation, for sure. Yeah.
That's fascinating, and it is so true, right? So even in every single business, the chemical business, which in several ways, I guess it's very traditional, but it's also incredibly innovative. So that requires a completely different way of working to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So it is. So things have changed so fast. Roy, you often reference to turning insights into action, right? So I think we had, even back in the day, we started having this type of conversations, And again, that's becoming more and more relevant as you face such demand for constant decision making, right? Can you maybe share some examples of value and benefits that decision intelligence has generated to your business, that tackling this in a different way? So again, moving from insights to action has generated benefits to your business.
Sure. And I can maybe highlight two examples there. One is in more of kind of the supply chain area where we've kind of implemented decision intelligence to manage safety stock, but also going a little bit further into kind of the raw materials and finished goods. The practical example typically there is, sure, we have a lot of data. Sure, we have a lot of insights. And sure, people can get to the actions that are required then to mitigate these or based upon these insights. And this is a discussion I think we've had many times before. So why do we need a platform? Why do we need technology? We can do this. The key point is, look at the throughput time of how much time it took to get to that decision. And then, for example, safety stock is a good example where we always said, hey, but eventually, yeah, we are able to get to the same action. The point is, it's just 4 weeks too late. So the inability to make the decision at the moment that it is required, that's where the huge difference is. Apart from the amount of FTEs you need to put in, whether it's the right decision and etc. So I think for us, and we've seen through P&L impact in better managing kind of our inventory. So from a cash perspective, that certainly has had impact already substantially, where we see being able to make the right decision, certainly at the right time, just has an impact. Now, the second example is where we also use decision intelligence, for example, in the area of pricing. So pricing for us is very much was focused on being able to do proper margin management. We knew raw material prices were increasing. We knew we were not doing a cost pass-through to customers. And still, our margins were kind of shrinking. And people knew and they had the insight that, okay, raw materials are going up, margins are shrinking, we're not doing the cost pass-through, price increases are difficult. But people were just lacking kind of the information. Now, what typically happened on a monthly, on a quarterly cycle, people got the information. So they got the data, they got the insight. But again, way too late to be able to make a decision and actually action or move the insight into action so that kind of the margin leakage would be prevented. Now, with decision intelligence, where there's actually a recommended price increase based upon raw material price increases, which are kind of predicted upfront, we've been able to make multi-million margin improvements in our P&L. And the interesting part for me is the way that kind of our commercial teams were looking at this. And initially, also myself, I was a little bit, let's say, conservative in terms of, okay, if you go to someone that is commercially managing a group of customers, and you're going to say, hey, I will tell you what price you need to offer to your customer that you've been serving for the past 20 years. That's tough, right? That's change management wise, that's tough. But the ability actually to provide the insight and the recommended action was extremely well received by our commercial teams. They actually said, hey, this is what we have been missing. I'm still a person that has the conversation with the customer, but at least I got the data in my back pocket today, what I need to discuss with my customer today.
That's super insightful. Yeah, exactly. So the right context behind a certain recommendation and well, I'm not surprised what you're sharing is pretty fascinating, Roy. I think what we often see is for a lot of companies, in some cases, they don't even have the data, they don't even have the insight, and but in your case, you do have that. It's actually so the ability to make the decisions and take the action on time, right? To move so from insight to action on time. What happens in for the majority of the companies we connect with is they end up making trade-offs because they just don't have the bandwidth, don't have the human capacity to take all those actions. So what happens is there's a lot of unmade decisions left, right?
Yeah.
And that's money on the table. That actually could be affecting your top line, your service levels, right? So ultimately, you're not, again, making those trade-offs. It's putting you in a suboptimal position, in a suboptimal situation. Roy, you were talking about that great ambition of becoming that amazing player in the chemicals, the largest player in the chemical business, and going through this true global transformation. In that context, how do you see, what's the role of decision intelligence from a broader scope? And you talked about evolving the way of working, but any other particular topics on which you say, okay, this is going to take us to the next level?
Yeah, I think there is a couple of factors, I would say here. So we've put out a very bold ambition, which is different from a target, but as an ambition to become the number one digital chemical company in the world. And that means that to be able to become it, you need to move, you need to think about your efficiency, your speed, how you collaborate with suppliers and with customers, and etc. Now, I think if you look at inside of the company, the understanding that relying on humans to gather the data, do the analysis, and make the right decision, I think we're already past the point where inside of the company, people think that can be done by individuals, right? So if you need to become a leaner company, then there are elements in the process of gathering data, analyzing data, making decisions, where you just need to augment that with technology. So where is then the best use of the scarcity of resources that you may have is in dealing with the complex trade-offs, right? And it's certainly in dealing with your engagement to the customers that are of most value to you and making sure that you provide the utmost service levels. So internally, I think there's hardly any debate anymore. It's much more on how do we do it rather than that we need to do it. The second part, I think, for us as a company, what of course in the chemical industry is incredibly relevant. We're part of an incredibly big value chain. So the importance of being able to work very closely together with your suppliers and your customers is going to be more and more important. So being a part of that value chain and then having to say, oh, give me 4 weeks because I need some time to make a decision before the rest of the value chain can continue. This is going to be not even a competitive advantage. I think a discriminating factor, for companies in that entire value chain to be able to operate. So we need to be able to have speed in our decision making to operate, let's say, as a value adding party in that whole value chain. So again, part of that ambition, we know we need to act now to be kind of that value contributor in the value chain going forward. And we cannot afford to be the one that everyone is waiting for.
And I'm sure that's already incredibly complex in the context of a global corporation like yours, with the number of suppliers and customers you have, the whole ecosystem. But it's probably not going to get any simpler, right? So, so you're spot on. I like that. I like that. And moving on to a different topic, Roy. I know that Mitsubishi as now for quite some time has this philosophy of kaiteki, right? I heard about it, I read about it, right? As a framework to delivering food, to delivering sustainable development promises. We talked about this, right? So having decision intelligence to operationalize decisions to support sustainability. How do you see this in the context of Mitsubishi Chemicals? So really leveraging decision intelligence to drive the sustainability agenda.
Yeah, I think this is for sure. Actually, it has again also here two elements, which internally have some good discussion. So one, a big part of our Kaiteki philosophy is, let's say, the value, the contribution we add to the world, to society, to employees, and of course also to shareholders. But the dialogue around doing well for your employees, actually decision intelligence can have quite a substantial influence, because what we see certainly in an area of Japan is that sometimes, and in many cases actually, people are running at the boundaries of their competencies, capabilities, and certainly from a health perspective, what is still reasonable kind of to ask of people. So the more data people need to process, the more analysis they need to do, the more facts they need to share and get to actions, the higher the burden on people. So actually, there is a positive contribution decision intelligence can do, kind of to rebalance that work life and doing well for your employees. It's not about reduction, it's not about firing people, but it's making sure that we use our resources in the right way. Second, I think in terms of sustainability, this is an area where I think we're in an area of exploration. So there is this sense that decision intelligence can help us to uncover kind of decisions we need to make in terms of sustainability in the wider supply chain, in how you share and collaborate information with your suppliers and customers. But there, in all honesty, we haven't exactly figured out yet how to. So there is this belief, but the action into, okay, how do we then optimally use it? Yeah, that requires some further exploration and testing.
And I guess in a way, Roy, what we're seeing with a number of other companies is, and going back to that reference of insight into action. So when you look at the things you care about when it comes to sustainability, right? So water consumption, plastic consumption, carbon footprint, right? So very often companies are unable to make decisions based on the insights, right? And so how do you bring that decision into the equation? So I guess it's going in that direction.
I think that's an area where we also believe that the ability to use also external factors, right, into the data and into the insights, that's going to be important for us, because we see day to day that external factors, external activities that happen have an influence on how we need to react. And again, the time it would take for us to analyze the effect of that external activity that happens is just too long, right? There you need to be faster in being able to react to when something happens, or even react before it happens, based upon predictive information and insights.
Exactly. Roy, lastly, what advice would you give to the audience today in terms of potentially how to get started with decision intelligence?
Yeah. Well, probably from our own experience, a couple of words of suggestion or advice. Advice sounds like we know it. We're also exploring and finding our way. But certainly suggestions I could give. One is, make sure upfront that the positioning of decision intelligence is done. correctly, which means probably first time people get confronted with decision intelligence, 8, 9 out of 10 will confuse it with advanced planning, for example. So how this decision intelligence is not per se replacing your advanced planning system, is not per se replacing existing systems, but is actually augmenting kind of the human factor where you simply don't have the time or enough resources to get to the right decisions in the right moment in time. That's, I think, critical. So the positioning, the right positioning at the start, that can substantially help kind of to save time. Second suggestion would be start doing. So you can talk about it. You can have a fantastic roadmap of how you're going to cover everything. But my experience is people will see and understand the value if you start doing. So select the use case, select an area where you know you can generate some proof based upon making the right decisions faster, predictive, potentially even, because once people see it, I haven't seen anyone, once they saw kind of what decision intelligence can do, that then says, okay, this doesn't make sense. So spend as little time to get to that point where you can show, even if it's small, you know, what it, how it works and what it will do.
Awesome. Very, very clear and pragmatic recommendations. Roy, thank you. Thank you very much. It's always inspiring and energizing to speak with you. Great insights. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. See you soon.